Iowa State has not been playing their best ball as of late. I think if you asked any fan out there, there is a level of concern going into this big game against BYU, which is why it was all the more confusing when the almighty sportsbook set the line for this one where they did.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Nick Marovitz. Thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Be sure to hit subscribe down below so we can prove that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. Today, we're talking about Iowa State being favored against BYU. Bit of a shocker. Why is that the case? We'll break that down in great detail. Then, in today's second segment, we're going to talk about the two really key position groups that need to step up against BYU. We're going to go one offense and one defense. And because we're doing it in that way, it gets interesting. So you're going to want to stick around for that. And then finally, we're going to talk about, is this kind of the game for Iowa State? Is this matchup against BYU for all the marbles? Does it all come down to this? We'll talk about that at the end of today's show. Can't wait to dive into all of that and more. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Okay, Iowa State is favored against BYU. A sentence that I did not think I would say this week. I will be completely honest. As I have preluded this show with, and as I have said many times before, Iowa State is just not playing their best ball right now. Plain and simple, right? 2 straight losses. One to probably a pretty good team, but the other to not so great a team. And I think in both those games, Iowa State played very poorly, in my opinion. Okay. I've come on here. I've done my rants about each of those games. I've broken them down in detail. Really, it just comes down to, I don't think Iowa State's playing very good football right now. Excuse me. Certainly not football to the level that they are capable. They are much better than what they've put on the field the last 2 games, which is obviously, exciting, I guess. That not really, but like at least there's hope that this is better. This team is better than what we've seen the last 2 weeks. But at the same time, now it's becoming like one game. Okay, you didn't play well one game. Like, let's turn it on this next one, and then we kind of just forget about that one. No big deal. Once you drop 2 in a row and you don't look good in either of those, now I need to see it again before maybe this is just who this team is. Well, the sports books don't need to see it again out there on the field. They don't need to see that high level of play from Iowa State. They're like, you know what? They've done it before, right? Yeah, just give it to them. Our friends over at FanDuel have Iowa State as a 2.5-point favorite right now at time of recording. Interesting. I'm not going to, I'm trying to convey the point that I am very surprised by this. So why would this be the case? Why could this possibly, how is this possible? I found this tweet from Greg Rubel on Twitter, or I guess on X, as a post, breaking down differences in statistical contrast between Iowa State and BYU. I probably said that a little bit wrong, but basically he's talking about like BYU ranks 4th in red zone defense. Iowa State ranks 118th in red zone offense. So where BYU is really good, Iowa State not so great. So we're not looking at a battle of the greats there. It's just going to be like kind of dominant. BYU ranks 31st in red zone offense. Iowa State ranks 100th in red zone defense. So if BYU, based on this tweet or this post, if BYU gets into the red zone, Iowa State's going to have a problem stopping them. If BYU, or I've got this next one here, BYU ranks 15th in sacks allowed. Iowa State ranks 120th in sacks. That one is a little bit more interesting than the other two to me, because apparently sacks is just not something that Iowa State is concerned with. Nonetheless, the other two certainly, I think, worth talking about. And then, like, all of those points, all they do is just further the point that maybe BYU should be favored in this one. I think to really get down to the nails, to the brass tacks on why this is an Iowa State favored game, matchup, showdown, whatever you want to call it, it goes beyond the actual X's and O's. It goes beyond the numbers. Because as of late, in my opinion, Iowa State has not played nearly as well as BYU. It's pretty simple. I'm not going to beat around the bush. They just haven't, okay? Plain and simple. However, BYU is coming off of a super emotionally charged matchup with Utah, right? And we all know, I mean, if you want to know more about that, I'm sure Locked On Big 12 has that plenty well covered, and you can go watch that. But boy, that's like an Iowa State level rivalry, right? And we know how Iowa State responds to those, or I guess just teams in general, but even this year, how Iowa State has responded to those kinds of matchups. You beat Iowa 16-13, right? Then you go down to Jonesboro and you really struggle against an Arkansas State. Now, is Arkansas State pretty good? We definitely thought they were. We definitely thought they were. They were 1-2 at the time of that game, but now they're 3-4, right? So maybe they're okay. Nonetheless, Iowa State certainly did not look good in that game. Struggled pretty hardcore. Very hot. I understand that. I remember. I kind of let that one go because it was post Iowa, right? There's that emotional like, whew, now that that's over. And then you catch yourself in another game. That's a real thing. We've seen that in college football before. And then you go back to the Arizona game, and this one wasn't as much of the emotional, kind of rival aspect, but certainly the whiteout. It was a night game. It was a huge spectacle, and this was a big win. Iowa State advances to 5-0, and then you got Cincinnati the next week, and we all know what happened, right? So I think that's a big part of this. BYU coming off of the win over Utah. It's a huge rivalry game. It was at home. Like there just seems to be all of the pieces for a quote unquote letdown next week. I'm not a huge believer in that, but we have seen this play out in the past. I think that's going to play a role, or that's part of the reason that Iowa State is favored. Another one, okay? Iowa State's at home. Iowa State hasn't lost at home in quite a while. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I pulled up their schedule. This season, obviously, we know they have not lost at home. Their 2 losses came on the road. So they beat Arizona at home. They beat Iowa at home. They beat South Dakota at home. Kansas State, obviously, over in Ireland. Then you take a look at last season, right? They beat Kansas State at home. They beat Cincinnati at home. They did lose to Texas Tech at home. But other than that, if you just keep going, beat UCF, beat Baylor, beat Iowa, that was on the road, beat Arkansas State, beat North Dakota, 2 games they probably should have won. Then you go back to 2023. They lost to Texas. They lost to Kansas. That was kind of like the last time Iowa State wasn't super elite at home, right? So you kind of got to go back 2 years. And even then, like still Iowa State at home, very, very good. TCU beat TCU. Beat Oklahoma State. Did lose to Iowa, though. And we knew that was going to happen because you have to go back to 2011 for the last time that Iowa State beat Iowa at home. Nonetheless, my point here is that Iowa State at home is not just another team, another day, whatever. Iowa State's very good at home, and this is a homecoming matchup. Iowa State's homecoming. It's completely sold out. I just saw the tweet. I think we're pretty close to selling out against Arizona State as well. So if you're seeing this, hey, think about it. But Iowa State fans really show up. I'm kind of with Jack Trice Mafia on this one. We do need to be a little louder on just the everyday defensive down. I think maybe those are kind of the times when we need the real crowd to show up. But for the most part, Iowa State gets really loud on like big third downs, late in the game especially. And I'm not saying that Bear Bachmeier has played nowhere, but he's played at East Carolina, at Colorado, at Arizona. I think this is going to be a very tough situation. Like we saw Mark Gronowski seem pretty frazzled in Ames. And he's one of the, now especially the most winningest like quarterback of all time or whatever. I think that says something about Iowa State at home. Obviously, Iowa State more comfortable at home, but also the fans extremely loud. So I think the pairing of Iowa State being at home, Utah coming off of a huge, emotional win over Utah. Both of those are going to play a big role. And then Iowa State still is a good team. They just haven't played well as of late. When you break it down like that, I can see at least why Iowa State is favored. But if they want to win the game, they are going to have to show up like unlike anything they have the last 2 weeks. I've got 2 position groups circled for, I think, how they can get that done coming up right here after this. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch. Let's be honest, most of us can't even name all our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks, savings, and investments, it's easy to lose track, and that can mean leaving money on the table. That's why I started using Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. It's helped me organize my accounts, track my spending, and get a better handle on my investments without having to touch a spreadsheet. Okay, very key there. Monarch's visual dashboards and smart tools make it so much easier to understand where my money's going and how to make it work harder for me. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I personally love FanDuel and how it gives me so many different ways to play. I've built parlays, player props. I've even followed the live lines during the games. You guys know I definitely struggle to get my bets in prior to kickoff, so doing it live is super helpful for me. It makes watching football even more exciting, genuinely, when you've got a little something riding on the action. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. So Iowa State favored against BYU. Very interesting. We broke down why I think that's the case just a few minutes ago here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm curious, what do you think? Why are they potentially favored? Let me know in the comments below or at Nick_Marv on Twitter. I appreciate the community we're building here. But let's talk about if Iowa State's going to get the win, like these sportsbooks seems to think they will. What do they need to do? Which position groups really need to step up big? I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh, they need to run cover 3 more. Oh, they need to, that'll be later in the week if we even get to that, because I do have one singular play, like I'm some OC, that I do think that if they run this play, I think Iowa State will be successful with that play. But nonetheless, we're talking position groups. Based on what I've seen this season, over the last 2 weeks especially, which position groups need to step up? Defensively, it's a secondary. Offensively, it's the wide receivers. I'm going to break down the defense first. Don't go anywhere, though, because that offense, this was a very tough decision. That was not a gimme by any stretch of the imagination. Defensively, look, the whole defense just needs to get better, okay? And it's interesting because they are so good when they want to be. It seems like when they turn it on, they're good. And I've talked about this. They were very good against Cincinnati in the second half, and they were very good against Colorado in the first half, right? I do think, and I said this yesterday, against Colorado in the first half, they got some help from Colorado, right? And there was certainly some yellow garments being thrown on the field against Cincinnati. Not saying that was the reason Iowa State held Cincinnati the way they did, but I think that played a role. So I'm not saying that Iowa State's defense is the best in the nation, that they just take plays off. That's not what I'm saying, but there are instances in the last 2 weeks especially, which I think is pretty much what we have to look at when evaluating this defense. There are instances in the last 2 weeks where Iowa State has been very good. Plain and simple. When we broke down the drive chart against Colorado, even I was a little surprised. When we broke down the second half against Cincinnati, it was the reason that Iowa State had a way back into that game. This defense can do it. They just need to be more consistent. And I think at the root of that, it's going to come down to the secondary. Unfortunate, I know. I think personally, I would like to see them get after the quarterback a little bit more, make the secondary's job a little bit easier. But at the end of the day, the secondary has a very large piece of this defensive scheme wrapped up in it, right? It's not really just kind of go back there and play defense, whatever. It's like you have a laundry list of responsibilities if you're going to be in this Iowa State secondary. Case in point, in my opinion, the first rushing touchdown for Colorado was, in my opinion, the perfect example of this goes beyond just passing downs. The secondary is key in making stops. Like even beyond just this scheme, this system, everybody knows that the secondary still has to play defense. Like the reason I wasn't a very good corner was I couldn't come down and make high-speed tackles. I was too scared I was going to snap my collarbone in half. That's why I give credit to those guys. Like, Buda Baker is one of the first guys that comes to mind. Or Tyrann Mathieu, like, fly downhill. They are just literally like their hair is on fire running like a train into an offensive player. Like, I don't know how they can do that, but I do know what it takes. You, as a corner, you can't just go out there and backpedal your way to an all-pro. You have to be able to make tackles in the run game as well, which is why I'm circling the secondary here. I think this secondary needs to take a step in the forward direction as far as what they're doing in the pass game and also in the run game. I'm not saying that they're not showing up at all, but when we looked at the yards, allowed through the air, through the ground, or on the ground, I think that this secondary is an area where if it got better, we would see a significant improvement on this defense. Now, I'm not saying that the linebackers are off the hook. I'm not saying the defensive line is off the hook. But if I had to circle one, it would definitely be the secondary. It just seems like it makes the most sense, especially when you consider, they have the most ground, I think, to cover. They have the most. If you were to pick one and say, if you improved it by 50 points, where would it be? I think if that makes sense, the secondary would use all 50 of those points. I think the linebackers are pretty close to what they're capable of doing. The defensive line is pretty close to what they're capable of doing. On some level, I think the secondary has a higher ceiling as far as what's left for what this group can accomplish. If that makes sense, just personal opinion there. All right, offensively, wide receivers. Let's try to make this quick. The wide receivers are the group that needs to step up the most, but that does not mean that Rocco's off the hook, and that does not mean that Taylor Mauser is off the hook. Those were the three that I was deciding on when really kind of breaking down this segment. The wide receivers are good, okay? And we've talked about how I think that they need to pivot towards the tight ends in this game. I think they need to get back to what they were the first few weeks. I still think that's true, but you can't have wide receivers dropping balls. You just can't do it. You cannot. We've seen it all season long. You can't have that. Rocco has been more accurate in the past. He's had games where he's more accurate than he has the last 2 weeks. Okay. I understand that. He needs to throw better balls in certain situations. I agree with that. Taylor Mauser needs to call better plays. I think flat out. He does call a pretty solid game, beginning to end, A to Z. But there are moments in there where it's like, if you're taking a test, like you might still get a 93% or an 88%, but those other 12%, like those weren't even close. Like that was like answering square on what color is a refrigerator. Like that's like, what are we even talking about here? You're not even in the same. Are you thinking you're in geometry? Like, what are we doing here? So that's what I'm talking about with Mauser. For the most part, pretty solid game plan. Couple plays that are very, very questionable. The rest of them are at least passable. So I'm gonna let Mauser off the hook from that angle. And Rocco, I think for the most part, makes relatively solid plays. Like puts the ball where it needs to be, makes good decisions for the most part. Very capable. So I'm not going to look at Rocco either, especially when it's only one guy. I think it comes down to the wide receivers need to catch the ball. Not because we're going to be forcing the ball to them every play. Like I said, I think we need to go back to the tight ends. But when they do get the opportunity, when they do get the ball thrown their way, they have to step up. They have to make that catch. It's non-negotiable. It's literally like half of their title, wide receiver. They need to receive the ball, period. It's inexcusable to be dropping balls that are on target, right? If it's barely outside his reach, one hand off the fingertips, some people are like, well, if it hits you in the hands, you got to catch it. All right, let's not get too crazy here. I think there is some truth in that, but if it's like fully extended a mile away on the sideline, like, all right, he that's not one that he's probably going to bring down 9 times out of 10. I'm not upset that he dropped that. But over the middle of the field, right in the breadbasket, has to be a catch. Has to be a catch. So if we can get consistent catches or even semi-contested ones, like this is the D1 level, right? The gimmies, like that's inexcusable. Contested catches, we have the talent to be bringing those down. This is supposed to be one of the top teams in the Big 12. We have the wide receivers to do it. They just need to step up and actually do it. I think if the wide receivers catch the balls and make the plays that they are asked to by Mauser and their ball is put on point by Rocco, this offense could take a step in the right direction, a much needed step in the right direction against BYU. And that'll be a big part of this game, right? But how big is this game? I think it might be one of the biggest. We'll break down why here in just 1 minute. College football is back, and I could not be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. And that's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. The app makes it super simple. And my favorite feature by far is that I can see the exact view from my seat before buying. When I'm looking at this little map and it's a bunch of squares in blue and white and whatever, I don't know what that means. I like seeing the actual picture of what exactly my view will look like from that seat. The zone deals are awesome too. You pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save big. Honestly, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way that I've bought tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Is Iowa State versus BYU the game of the century? No, probably not. But is Iowa State versus BYU potentially the game-defining game for Iowa State this season? Yes. Yes, I do think so. You're here with Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I am putting all of the stock into this matchup for Iowa State against BYU. Okay. Why? The question is why? Well, for one, BYU is the highest rated opponent left on Iowa State's schedule, the highest ranked opponent that Iowa State will face all season, obviously, unless they make it to the Big 12 championship game or whatever. But the rest of the way, they've got 11 BYU, then they've got 24 right now, Arizona State, and then they've got TCU, Kansas, and Oklahoma State. Now, I'm not saying that TCU, Kansas, Oklahoma State can't be ranked above 10 before we face them, right? There are still 3 weeks, really, until we face Kansas, 2 weeks or whatever until we face TCU. Well, I guess there's the bye week in there with Kansas, but no, you get what I'm saying. I just think it's pretty improbable. So I think it's fair to assume that BYU will be the highest ranked opponent Iowa State will face this season, unless they make the Big 12 championship game, unless they, make the college football playoff, whatever. Based on the games we know. That's for one. For two, you're trying to prevent a 3-game skid. That's kind of almost number one. That's a pretty big one. If you lose this one, now you've lost 3 in a row. You've lost a game at home. Now you're going into, and this is the beginning of, but you're in the middle of then a really tough portion of your schedule. How do you correct that? Where are you at mentally, right? Then you're 5-3. You've had 3 games in a row where you can wrap up the bowling part of the season. You could say, yep, we are certified bowlers. Nope, not this week. Nope, not this week. Nope, not this week. There's going to be a level of, man, what are we doing after that? You've got to get this win for that reason, okay? Then you look at the college football or the Big 12 championship implications. It's a win or go home for the rest of the season for Iowa State. There is no more losing games, period. Like, every game is, they always say, like, is this a must-win game? Look, if you're not going into a game thinking it's a must-win, like, we've got like, I've never, ever either heard of someone or gone into a game thinking, yeah, we could lose this one. It's no big deal. Like, if you're thinking that, you've already lost. So, for one, every game is a must-win game. But there are no non-must-win games for Iowa State. I don't know how else to say that. Every single game is extremely important. If they win the rest of their 5, they go 10-2. And that's the only way they have a chance, a hope, a glimmer of possibility of making the Big 12 championship game. They will not get in if they lose one more. We know this, period. End of story. It's not even worth bringing up. It's common knowledge at this point that Iowa State has to go 5-0 the rest of the way to make the Big 12 championship game. So, of course, every game until they lose one, right? Every game is extremely pivotal, is probably the most important game of the season because it's the next one, right? When we go back and we look at the season in review, come December or whatever, come January, maybe February, maybe national champions. we might circle a different game, right? We might circle Iowa, or we might circle Arizona State if of these last 5 or whatever. I'm just saying right now, every single game, the next game up is the most important game. Forget about the last 7 games. Literally all of the brain power needs to go into this BYU game, right? And I just had another thought, so I'm going to throw this in before we wrap up today's show. We still have some other points to get to, but I did forget to bring up reason. If you watched to this point, shout out to you, because I forgot to say this in the first segment. Another reason why Iowa State's probably favored coming off the bye, right? That's going to, Matt Campbell talks about like 70% of Power 4 teams coming off the bye lose. You've got an extra week to talk about what their plan is against this BYU team. That's going to, that plays a role. That definitely does. Gives guys to heal up, gives time to guys to heal up. Who knows exactly what the team looks like? We'll wait for that injury report, but another point to at least consider. So if you made it to this point in the episode, either tweet at me or comment down below. Let's comment. Sinado. Yeah, I love the Sinado. Always thinking about it. You see it right there over my shoulder. Nonetheless, let's keep it moving. Why is this game so big against BYU? Well, I do think that in some ways, BYU is starting to become one of the top teams in the Big 12. Let's also talk about that. I based on what BYU did last season, they looked really good, unbelievable. The wheels fell off, and that sometimes that happens. But BYU was so good last season, and then they are doing it again this season with a true freshman quarterback who wears number 47, mind you. I will bring that up multiple times this week because it's just the epitome of awesome. But the fact that they're doing it back-to-back like that, they are starting to become one of the top teams in the Big 12. There are a handful of teams, in my opinion, that are up there. And if Iowa State can win this game, it starts to push them back up into that conversation. I think after the loss to Colorado was when they really kind of got knocked down in a lot of people's minds of, all right, where is this team actually at? The loss to Cincinnati, I do think it was about 50-50. Is Iowa State not very good, or is Cincinnati way better than we thought? I think that was a pretty 50-50 split on where people fell on that one after the loss to Colorado. Now, granted, I know better than anybody. Like, I can read the comments. I'm the one that covers this team literally every single day. I know how hurt they were, right? I know all of the intricacies of the loss to Colorado. But in the public's perception, there was definitely they lost to Colorado. Maybe they just didn't have it. Those first 5 games, whatever. And we want to talk about the Iowa situation. Look, I'm not going to because I get it. That's kind of little brother activity. Seems like Iowa loves to do that all over Twitter against Iowa State right now. I'm not going to do it. But all I'm going to say is, do they have a win over someone with a conference win? Nonetheless, I get it. I get the loss against Colorado. But I think if you can beat BYU, now you're pushed back up into that conversation of they are a really good team in the Big 12. They are one of those top teams. They can hang throughout the course of the season, and they can make a push at the end of the season, right? That's what this team needs to do as far as like the next step in the program. The next step is perception, in my opinion. Where is Iowa State when the season starts? When everyone's 0-0, where is Iowa State predicted to end the season? Because historically, not picked very high. And I'm not saying that they deserve to be. They just aren't. If they get this win over BYU, and then obviously they would have to kind of finish the season. If they just beat BYU out of nowhere, like, okay, you got an upset. Like, that's happened before too. But this is the first step in the direction of Iowa State being one of those really top teams in the Big 12. I think they can do it. The Sportsbooks thinks they can do it. Do you think they can do it? Let me know in the comments down below or on Twitter at Nick_Marv. Thank you guys so much for making this your first watch or listen of the day and making it to this point in the episode. You're a real one. Sinado down below. That's how I'll know. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.